Hello, and welcome to the Crowley ISD PLC Curriculum Preview for the 5th 6 weeks for 3rd grade. In this video, we will discuss the 5th 6 weeks assessment blueprint, address our hotspots for this unit, and view a real-time authentic literacy lesson. You will gain a deeper understanding of active reading to transfer responsibility of learning to the student. Please take a moment to review your Grade 3 ELAR blueprint. There are 20 instructional days in Unit 5, Discovering Connections. The instructional dates are February 23rd through March 27th. The assessment will be posted on March 24th, and the assessment date is March 31st. Let's take a look at our hotspots for this unit on our Grade 3 heat map by standard. We see that 3.13b is a hotspot, as well as Figure 19d and Figure 19e. Let's take a closer look at these standards on our IFD. 3.13b reads, draw conclusions from the facts presented in text and support those assertions with textual evidence. In this standard, drawing conclusions is described as a form of inference in which the reader gathers information, considers the general thoughts or ideas that emerge from the information, and comes to a decision. The conclusion is generally based on more than one piece of information. The student must be able to gather information and determine its importance. This is an active reading skill. Next, 3.8 reads, student understands, makes inferences, and draws conclusions about the structure and elements of fiction, and provide evidence from text to support their understanding. Note the levels of inferences students need to make, and that this standard will be assessed with Figure 19d and E. Figure 19d is built into the knowledge and skills statements for fiction, nonfiction, literary nonfiction, poetry, and drama. Summarize information in text, maintaining meaning and logical order. Note that students may be required to summarize in multiple genres, including drama, literary nonfiction, expository text, and fiction. One best practice we'll look at today is teach reading as thinking. Reading is a cognitive process, an active, constructive, creative, higher-order thinking activity that involves distinctive thinking strategies before, during, and after reading. Another best practice we'll look at today is giving students daily opportunities to talk about their reading. These two best practices are critical components of an authentic literacy lesson. Let's look at the 4 components of an authentic literacy lesson. They are read, annotate, discuss, and write. Let's see an authentic literacy lesson in action.
So after we do the small group brainstorm, I ask them to come prepared for Text Talk Time. And Text Talk Time is a discussion structure that I created in order to give the kids an opportunity to talk about a text that we had been reading during the week. It's an opportunity for them to call the shots and to discuss what they were thinking when they read the text. And it's also an opportunity for me to ask questions that challenge them and that I'll later expect them to respond to in writing. Before we get started, I want to go over the expectations like we do every single time. One person speaks at a time. And lately, remember, we've been kind of talking about how sometimes we get excited and we all start joining in and blurting out, and that's okay every once in a while. That happens in normal conversation. But we just remember that if I call for the zero noise signal, that we're all going to come back as a group and hear one person. Listen carefully to the speaker, right? You don't know if you're adding something if you're not listening to what someone else said, right? So you need to listen carefully. And use hand signals. So 2 fingers if you have something to add onto what somebody has already said, and thumbs up if you have something new to say. I use a strategy of hand signals in order to promote active listening. I also use hand signals to help me facilitate the conversation. Oh wow, lots of thinking. This strategy has been really effective because raising your hand wasn't enough. It gives students an opportunity to show me that they have something to say. Phineas, you have something new to say, looks like. Okay.
I have 2 questions.
Pose them to the group.
Okay, so the first one is, what happened to the ship after they left? The ship that was gonna come and they waited?
Can we go to that part? Do you know what page it said that on so we can...
I think. Well, we heard that in the beginning that.
For the first 20 minutes of the conversation, I'm just choosing students and trying to give turns to an equal number of students from different parts of the circle. I'm the facilitator in this discussion. Natalia, you have something to add?
It's also on Sacagawea. It was hard probably for her because she had her baby with her. And to go around that river and stuff, like babies, like we were talking about in our group, babies need a lot of good care. And it would be hard to go through all that, especially with a baby.
Do we have evidence that Sacagawea was with them when they crossed the falls? I know. Yes. I don't think she was with them the whole time. Devontae, do you see where there's evidence?
In the picture, it shows Sacagawea. She's pointing at the falls, and Lewis and Clark and a slave, they're like, Sacagawea is like pointing that they might die in the falls, so they probably have to go around it.
And since I know that this is a narrative nonfiction, and we've been learning about how in nonfiction the pictures and the captions, that gives us lots of information, we could probably be pretty sure that Sacagawea was with them and that this picture is placed here to give us that information. Next, I give them questions that I expect them to write about once we're done with Text Talk time. Let me pose these questions to you so we can get a little bit of talking about this before I send you out to write. I'm gonna take us back to viewpoint. It's not why the author wrote, but how the author feels about something. How does the author feel about Lewis and Clark? So will you take a minute and turn and talk to the person sitting next to you about what you're thinking about this question? What do you think how do you think the author feels about Lewis and Clark? After I pose a question to the group, I give the students an opportunity to turn and talk as a way to give them a few minutes to talk and think about possible answers before they feel like they need to share that with the whole group. Who thinks they found some evidence to back up what they think about how the author feels about Lewis and Clark? Let's go to Alyssa.
It says on page 644, from St. Louis, Lewis and Clark traveled to Washington, D.C., and almost every town they passed through, they brought bands to welcome them as heroes, which meant that like whenever they came in, everyone's like cheering and like congratulate them. And so like the author like put that in to make everyone feel that they're heroes.
Yeah.
Okay. So you would say that the author feels like Lewis and Clark were heroes? The next question was, what is the author's viewpoint about exploring? And I provided them with the sentence frame to start their answer. The author thinks exploring is... If you were gonna fill in this sentence, how would you fill it in? The author thinks exploring is...
I think it's exciting because you could find out new stuff about different things you never knew about.
Okay, like here on 644, I know...
SOS.
You could find out new stuff about different things you never.
Surrender these calculators, that's for dang sure. But I'm sending SOS because 2 of them didn't get sent back to the right campus. Blah blah. I mean, they're the freaking same calculator. So they want their calculators back.
I think it's exciting because you could find out new stuff about different things you never knew about.
Okay, like here on 644, I noticed connecting with what you what you were saying, that it's exciting because you found things I'd never found before. Like on page 644, it says, the expedition returned with numerous samples of plant and animal life that had never been seen by American scientists.
Especially in those times, North America wasn't North America yet. It was called the New World. Yeah, so it was pretty interesting to them because they found new plants, new animals, new stuff they could use. And
on 641, I noticed that he said, I found a descriptor word, they emerged from the Rocky Mountains into the lovely valley of Clearwater River. If an author's using an opinion word like lovely, that's sort of showing how they feel about something. So I'm thinking that it's time to change gears. We need to get up and go back to our desks and start getting our minds ready for writing. In today's discussion, I posed the question about how the author feels about exploring, how the author feels about Lewis and Clark, with the expectation that the students were going to pull evidence from the text to support those statements. That's challenging work, and I knew that it would be pretty challenging for the students to work on individually in writing, so doing all that difficult thinking together in a group while they had support and they could hear other ideas is helpful for them, and I think it makes it easier for them to write about it individually later. A big part of the speaking and listening standard that I was focusing on has to do with coming prepared for the discussion. So I wanted to give my students ways to share their thinking, and one strategy I used was giving them a Post-it to record that thinking so that when it came time to actually discussing the text, they had evidence or remembered what it was that they were thinking when they read.
On page 639, I predicted that the Shoshone tribe will try to find Clark and the rest of the crew, and my prediction became true.
My favorite thing about the Post-its is that it honors their thinking, and it helps them to remember what it is that stood out to them.
I said that the cross of discovery had...
I talked to the students about how sometimes we have this great thought and then we move on to the next thing and we already forgot what we were thinking. So a Post-it is a way of kind of holding on to that thinking, and we can even put it right in the book. What I like about the Post-it is that it helps them feel prepared for the discussion.
A final strategy I'd like to share with you today is called the pattern folder. It's a way to help students draw conclusions using textual evidence. This strategy can be adapted to meet your grade level needs.
The pattern folder is a strategy that I use to help students gather textual evidence, draw conclusions, and trace a pattern over a period of time.
Hey folks, can you all pull out your folders for me? Pull out your folders. Open it up, grab some of those note cards.
One of the things that I've noticed with students is that they will read, and they will read to figure out what happened, but it's more difficult for them to think about what kinds of themes can I follow throughout the text.
As you pull out some of those note cards and you look at the bottom of them where you've drawn the conclusions, I want you to be able to ask yourself, did I use these kinds of words? All right, if you're using these kinds of words, then you're on the right track.
As we were practicing this very early on in the year, I realized that they needed some kind of map. They needed something to really physically be able to organize their thinking. And so I devised this little manila folder with the library pockets in there, gave students all kinds of note cards.
Take a peek at some of those cards so that you can be looking for the textual evidence that you might need.
This is how their process looks. They have their book, they read it, they use Post-it notes in order to mark passages that fit into or an example of one of the patterns that they have identified in the text. And then when they come to class the next day, they go to the sticky notes, they pull out the textual evidence, and then they work on drawing conclusions and leaving those index cards then in the pockets.
You're really thinking about how it represents how you see society. And how you see society could very well be, are you representing normalcy? Are you representing equality?
It gives them a purpose for reading. They're not just reading the text to figure out what happened. Now all of a sudden, they have assigned their own purpose to the text.
All right, so then how are you going to tie it all together, though? What does this tell you about the society?
I don't know. It's hard to be different.
I agree.
There's so many rules that they have to follow.
It's a great formative assessment tool for me. At the end of every day or every class period, I can go into the folders, I can take a peek at them. Oftentimes I'll start class by photocopying a few and saying, look at these great ones that happened yesterday. Maybe I'll photocopy one, take the name off of it and say, now this is a great start, great textual evidence. If I were going to draw a conclusion about this one, this is how I would write it.
Thank you, and I appreciate you participating in the PLC Curriculum Preview. Don't miss next 6 week's PLC Curriculum Preview video that will spotlight the gradual release of responsibility. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thanks again, and I appreciate your time. Until next time, goodbye.